We're turning to Division 2 in the Allianz Football League. It's a deep dive. Maurice Brosnan of the Irish Examiner is with us. Maurice, I was trying to make the case in my head that this might be the greatest Division 2 of all time. The Dubs, like, still the remnant of the greatest Gaelic football team ever in Division 2. Derry, legitimate All-Ireland contenders in Division 2. Mickey Hart Louth, an absolute mastermind, one of the greatest managers of all time. The Meath story, because Colin O'Rourke's first season is there. Clare, under Colin Collins, the longest serving inter-county manager in position. Limerick, massively disappointing. And then, of course, the Magnificent Seven rides again. It's the second one, the lesser sequel, with the Kildare management team, who aren't quite doing what I hoped they would do. So, and it all matters. There's like some team is going to end up playing in the Tailteann Cup who do not want to be there.
Yeah, I love that energy, Ger. I couldn't agree with you more. Even just from just a slight tangent, but just as to cover it from a reporting perspective, it's so much more enjoyable than almost anything else in Gaelic football. I just at the hurling last week. The less said about that, the better. I'm doing this weekend. I'm in the Hyde. I'm at Mayo Roscommon, and I was just thinking about it this morning. There's an element of, I wouldn't be one bit surprised if there's an element of shadowboxing in that game. As great as we all laud the league, but just given the nature of this season and the calendar, I think Division 1 has slightly been less than the small, but there is an element of shadowboxing within that. Whereas Division 2, just to report on, it is box office. Players are desperate to play. Sidelines are getting panicky. There's, the games I've been at are absolutely full-blooded. The crowd are totally enthralled by it. It is, without shadow of doubt, the best competition in the GA. I could not agree with you more.
I left out the Red Storm Rising of James O'Donoghue's Cork. How the hell did I forget that? And actually, looking at the fixtures, the Cork needs Dublin to beat Derry this weekend. But if they do, there's still a world in which Cork can rack up big scores and squeak into Division 1 next year. It would be okay. We don't expect it. It would be outrageous if that did happen. But Cork can look up as much as they have to look down.
They can do, yeah. It does feel a small bit, doesn't it, that the width of a post, the Brian Hardy's late shot could end up scuppering them. That would feel incredibly consequential later on in the year. The thing that's interesting, Ger, is though, if you, rather than start with the league, if you reverse this, if Cork don't go up, for example, right, and you fast forward to, and let's say Clare have a nightmare run of games now, really. They play Cork this weekend. The weekend after, I'm pretty sure it's Derry, and then they've Limerick.
Yeah.
So it's feasible that they only end up on 4 points, and that would put them right in relegation trouble. But the caveat is that Clare play Cork again in the first round of the Munster Championship this year. They're on that side of the draw. How many times have we heard about poor Colin Collins? If only he hadn't been drawn with Kerry in a semi-final, they could have made it a Munster final. They're on that side, and that game then becomes incredible. Like that you're saying to Clare, there's still an avenue for you to make Sam Maguire get to a Munster final here. You're on the opposite side to Kerry. The significance of that game suddenly, I think, is really interesting, because that's where people need to start. Is that, I'm not going to do it now, but pick your 4 provincial winners and your 4 provincial finalists and work backwards from there, and look at the options for teams like, I look at a team like Down as well, like Down on the other side Down around that side with Armagh, Antrim in a preliminary game, and then so it's Down, Donegal, Cavan, Armagh, potentially in a quarter-final, all looking for a chance to get to a semi-final, and then a final against Sam Maguire. Like, there's legitimate pathways for those sorts of teams that, unconnected to the league is what I'm saying, it's just given the nature of the draw, that even for a team like Clare or a team like Cork, they could have come off this off a really promising league. Can you imagine if they lost that game? Like, how that would change the complexion of their season. I think that's a lot of people worried that the provincials will be lessened in this system, and to a certain extent they will be. But for teams like that, I think it becomes even more interesting.
That Louth Kildare game this weekend in Louth, Morris, feels like what's the equivalent of a Gaelic 6-pointer, 4-pointer, I suppose. Like it's it's absolutely huge, because whoever loses that, all of a sudden, you might be staring the Tailteann Cup in the face.
Absolutely, yeah. Especially for Kildare, I think this game is massive. Like, it is absolutely huge. It's kind of crazy that they've found themselves in this situation. Part of me thinks Kildare are, I hate to do this, Ger, I think they're the most interesting team in Gaelic football this year. Kildare, like any I talked about a second ago, could come off a disaster of a league and make their season in that semi-final against Dublin. It's not likely, but again, just when you look at the nature of the structure, there's an option there, basically, that they're on that side of the draw. I actually think Louth when I was doing this exercise this morning, I think Louth are an outside bet to get to a Leinster final this year. I think the path is right there for them. When you can take into consideration that they're on the same side as Westmeath, who are already guaranteed their spot in a Sam Maguire. So how much is their need? A relatively new-looking Meath, who they've already beaten. There's absolutely an option that Louth could end up in a Leinster final. So regardless of how this game goes at the weekend, we could still see Louth in a Sam Maguire as well. But I think it's more pressing for Kildare, given the fact they're on the same side as Dublin, given the scale of negativity around that team. I think this weekend it does feel a bit make or break.
The scale of negativity is coming off record-breaking defeats. That's the issue. We were looking back at the stats over the last while, and Kildare have had 10-point or more defeats in Newbridge, very rarely in their entire history, but 2 in the league, 4 times. 2 of them have happened in this season, and it's like, it's this is not great. Newbridge has become a disaster for them, and they can't seem to get their best players playing the way we know they can. It's almost like their training is totally out of kilter with where they are supposed to be, and maybe they've decided that their eggs are going in the Leinster Championship basket this year. But it's a really risky high wire act.
It is, and I don't see evidence of that. I've seen every single Kildare game. I actually covered their game in Clare in Cusack Park as well, and I don't see. I tend to agree with some of the conversation around Kildare in terms of the criticism of, I'm sure you've heard it too, Ger, there's no game plan, there's no structure, the players don't necessarily know what they're doing, they're taking pot shots and they're reliant on individuals to drag them over games. And I disagree. I see lots of evidence of a game plan. If anybody watched the game at the weekend, Michael Murphy was on goal commentary and he mentioned at the very start, Kildare are doing something different to what a lot of teams do against Derry. They're not attacking with 15 players, they're leaving Mick O'Grady and Owen Doyle back on the 45 because they're conscious of getting caught on the counter. That actually reminded me of anybody listening to the football pod this week. That was a point that James made as well, that you kind of need to leave 2 back for fear against teams like that because they break so quickly for fear of being caught that way. So now, whether you agree with it or not, that's structure. I think the problem, Kildare's greatest problem is their attack, and because they're coughing up these turnovers, they're taking shots from really difficult angles, and then they're getting caught with these high turnovers on the other side. That's killing them. But I don't think I actually do. I see a plan. I see the realms of a plan there. There's a structure there. So then you flip that and think if their problem isn't necessarily their structure, is there a psychological thing? Like the extent to which after Sheeran got burned for that first goal at the weekend was.
We're just gonna interrupt you there. Sorry, Maurice. The line is deteriorated to a point now where it's too tricky. So we'll just dial you back and we'll get to it. Those stats, right? Last Sunday, Kildare equalled their second biggest home NFL defeat of all time. 1976, Cork beat them 5-9 to 6 points. Also that 76 team beaten by Kerry 3-10 to 5 points, and then Derry 2-15 to 7 points last week. And look, a lot of people saying afterwards, Kildare goalkeeper could have been man of the match because it should have been 6.
Yeah. Donald made a lot of good saves. Wasn't enough.
Under Mick O'Dwyer, when Mick came in first in the early 90s, the team battened down the hatches and became super defensive to set up a defensive structure and became a hand passing side. And were trying to win games 7-6, and they didn't score a goal in the 91-92 season for 7 games. They've now gone 7 games without scoring a goal again, and they'll break that record if they don't score a goal against Louth on Sunday. And as I said, they've suffered 7 10+ defeats in Newbridge.
If you're not raising green flags in the league, you're going one direction.
7 10+ defeats in Newbridge. We think this is in history ever, to the dawn of time, back to the dinosaurs, and 2 of them have come in their last 2 games, 10+ point defeats. So Maurice is back. I think hopefully you're able to hear us a bit better. You were making the point that there is a structure. There's the bones of a structure there, and it's identifiable if you do the analysis. But is it a psychological issue? Is the question?
And I think that's the key question from Kildare perspective, because I just think the way that game slid away from them. I don't, and it's very hard to put your finger on. They conceded an early goal against Dublin first game in the league, and it didn't seem to knock a stride out of them. It didn't seem to rattle Kildare. Whereas definitely the difference after they conceded the first goal against Derry, it was almost as if they knew if we let this team build up a lead, there's absolutely no hope for us to come back, and it just descended drastically from there. Whether or not that's associated with Newbridge, I don't know, Ger, but I do think that there is definitely there is a plan. There is. I see evidence of a plan. I saw that in Clare. I kind of saw Clare coughing up that lead coming because you could see exactly what Kildare were trying to do. The fact that they were willing to drop off the kick out in the first half playing against the winds and let Kildare, who were an unbelievably well coached team but a running team, run the ball hard, and then suddenly in the second half when you're playing into a breeze, they got a really good press on the kick out. So they knew what they were doing on the opposition's kick out. They knew what they were doing on their own kick out. They had a plan with their attack. They brought on Daniel Flynn that day as well. Kevin Flynn came on. They're able to kick from range, so they're kicking points. So I saw evidence of a plan there. I didn't see as much of it at the weekend. I think the way it descended is drastic, but I do think it's not as fundamental to say there's no structure or there's no style of play. There's something more than that.
I know they've been working with a sports psychologist and they rate her very highly, and this is obviously going to be a long-term thing. Derry, it might be a bit of a false benchmark because they're complete wolf in sheep's clothing in Division 2. They're a Division 1 team, they're All-Ireland contenders, and they're much further down the line than Meath and Kildare. And like if you think about last season, they were annihilated in the first 15 minutes against Dublin, and then they recovered from that to nearly knock Mayo out. And if they just had gotten over Mayo, I think the whole mood would have changed. But there is this kind of rump of Kildare supporters who are angry, who are just like, they feel entitled to be angry all the time at everything that's happening because the team won under 20 All-Ireland, so therefore we should be All-Ireland champions already off the back of that. And it's fantasy, so it's going to take a long time. It's not. Here's the thing: if they win this game and they beat Meath, then all of a sudden it's been a solid, with some disaster in the middle, a Division 2 campaign, and they're looking forward to Sam Maguire irrespective of what happens, and they can plan for the 3 games in the round robin, and there's like the green shoots of recovery. But if they lose this game and they lose against Meath, suddenly they're a Division 3 team and they're playing Tailteann Cup football, and I would suspect a lot of the players might end up playing football in America in the summer.
And do you associate the negativity around supporters with anything to do with their performances in Newbridge?
I don't. You'd have to say, yeah, like the support in front of your home county is the thing that galvanises people. But like, I don't know. There's a clip doing the round from the player's voice where Niall Morgan is talking about the team being stopped by a fan in an apple green and being told, "Do you think I spent my money to?" I'm like, oh Jesus, maybe just fans of all counties are a bit wild.
We all get territorial about our county, don't we? I mean,
but do you feel entitled? Do you feel entitled to abuse the players? I don't.
And is that separate from there's a loyal contingent of Kildare fans? I just to go back to the game in Ennis again for a second. In the first half of that game, there was an off-the-ball incident. Clare was trying to back hard. The whole reason that flared up was because of an absolute roar from the far stand, and it was a very vocal roar. Referee had missed it, kind of continuously berating the linesman that he needed to do something about it. The Kildare fans there were convinced it was a red card. At the very end of that game, so Kildare, at one point they're 6 points down, they come back to win by 1, and they take kind of a moment in front of the stand with those supporters who travel across the country, a small cohort of supporters, but what it seemed like a very loyal supporters who would back them to the tilt. And the difference between that and the reason I asked that question, I think I find it interesting sometimes between that and fans who could turn up at home nearly kind of with the negativity in their hearts already as they arrive. But just to go back to something you said there a second ago about how players could end up in America, I think this year it's probably gone under the radar slightly. If Kildare were to end up in the Tailteann Cup and if teams were to throw their hat at it, the damage that would do to the integrity of the competition, because it's a round robin this year. If you were to go back to last year, can you imagine if, and they're a totally different team now, I don't mean this is a slur or anything, can you imagine if Down were in a round robin group stage last year, how less enjoyable that competition would be to watch a team who clearly weren't committed to the competition, play 3 games and get what would be fairly 3 one-sided results. If teams do that in the Tailteann Cup this year, it's a disaster for that competition. Like the competition as itself, the reason we liked that competition last year was because we got competitive games, teams seem to be buying in, but teams don't buy in, and we end up suffering 3 round robin because of the nature of this group, which everybody was crying out for. Let's not forget that managers were saying this is what we sold last year. So there is kind of an onus on teams to buy it to make this competition work, because the alternative is that it becomes still, despite the fact that we finally have tiers, it still becomes one-sided, uncompetitive games, which is exactly why we were all so frustrated by the championship in the first place.
Yeah. It would be a heaping disaster upon disaster. So, look, I don't know. I do still have faith in the current Kildare setup. I do think that the fact that they came back against Clare, I do think the fact that they went down against Dublin and showed something suggests that there is still something. And I absolutely know from people who contact me that the management team and the players are still aligned, that there's no disaffected rump in the camp who are like, oh, this is a disaster. Like, that hasn't happened yet. So that's why this game is so important at the weekend. Kildare hockeyed Louth last year in the Leinster Championship, and I actually thought that Louth might give them a game. They're definitely going to give them a game this weekend, and they're going to give them their fill of it. What's going to happen?
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. You can actually, beyond the cliched nature of this usual competition, you can actually put stock in the value of... I did a piece of Kevin Feely recently on his return from an Achilles injury, and what he did to go from that game at Edenstown in August to get back in January is remarkable. And it's beyond just doing the physical nature of it. A guy who has the knowledge because of his profession. There's something more than that. There's a kind of a drive. That's what I was trying to get at him when I sat down with him. Like, what is it that motivated you to continually do this, to put yourself to push these sort of boundaries to get back to play for Kildare? And he was adamant that the reason he did it is, despite the fact that he turned 30 a week after he tore his Achilles, the best is yet to come. And he did not mean that solely individually. He meant that collectively. Like, he's adamant that he remembers 2010, the sensation around that semi-final, and that it is totally attainable for Kildare to get back to that level. Now, to an element, you can actually put stock in that a guy with that knowledge, of that value of character, believes in this team. I think there is something. I genuinely do think there is something in that. I know some people tend to roll their eyes at that sort of stuff. But
no, I think you're right. I read the piece, Maurice. It was sensational, and I do think that anybody abusing the Kildare footballers needs to read that piece and think, well, I'm a bit of a clown for abusing this crowd, because look at the shit that they put themselves through to get to go and represent Kildare. And, like, I don't know, it's very disappointing to read some of the stuff that I've been reading on social media, particularly for a group of players who are not doing this for glory. Like, they're not doing it for... Anyway, look, I got sidetracked there, Maurice. Sorry. We're out of time. Give me a prediction for who's going to win that game.
Kildare.
Okay. The right answer. Good stuff, Maurice. Great to have you with us again. Thanks a million.
Thanks, lads.
It's Maurice Brosnan there from the Irish